Black like me. Black like me. Black like me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Hey, good people. Not many people know this, but I'm a very nostalgic kind of person. I love anniversary and the commemoration of important things that have taken place in our world, my community, and my life. I'm in an interesting season where some of my work is being commemorated. This is the 10th anniversary of the penning of an essay that I wrote for the Cap Times newspaper here in Madison, Wisconsin, and it was entitled Justified Anger. I wrote this article after having an experience with local police, downtown Rotary, and all of those things just triggered me to begin thinking about what it was like navigating a wonderful place to live in many respects of Madison, Wisconsin, a mid-sized Midwestern town that happens to be the seat of city, county, state government, and the home of a major flagship university, the University of Wisconsin. And what does it mean to swim upstream in a place like this when in 2023, I and my colleagues are still often the first and the only in boardrooms, classrooms, meeting rooms, banking offices, architectural offices. And so I penned this essay just saying what it means to me to be in this experience. Now, what made this experience so interesting is that Madison, Wisconsin thinks of itself as this real liberal bastion, this place that is self-described as the Berkeley of the Midwest, whatever that means. And granted, Wisconsin, its campus was really known as a very progressive place as we largely boycotted the Vietnam War and Dow Chemical Company and other groups like that coming to our campus to recruit future engineers and physicists and people to help fuel the war or staff the artillery of the war, what have you. And I feel that Madison has ridden on the laurels of that experience by thinking it really doesn't have to do anything different to live up to that reputation. Now, those of us who are people of color will argue that although Madison is very liberal in many respects, it is not with regards to race and race relations. Not only are we outnumbered, but we're not represented even in places where you would expect to see numbers of black people, classrooms, banks, and other places. And that balance has caused a real dynamic that's causing many of the black people, upwardly mobile, upward middle class, black people who can afford to live anywhere else, who can afford to move from Madison, are choosing to do so. So I penned this article. It dropped on December 18th, 2013, a few weeks before the end of the year, and it became the 11th most read story, 11th or 12th most read story of the entire year. Just being in print from the 18th through the 31st, it was the Cap Times 11th or 12th most read story of the entire year. And it took up the community by storm. I started getting emails and calls from news outlets all around the country, including PBS NewsHour and other impressive spaces to talk about my take on how Madison treats its black community. Well, it's caused a number of things, the rippling effect of many things, the creation of many things. I'll let you read the article so that you can hear and learn about those things on your own. You don't need me to tell you this and then you read it. But I wanted to do a couple of things to commemorate this period of time. Cap Times is doing a number of things. Its editor, a retired editor, who is now the publisher, who gave me space to write this article 10 years ago, has asked me to write another piece 10 years later. I made a decision to not write a report. That was not my job. This was not a grant proposal. I didn't want to give an update on what we had accomplished, but I did want to talk about what society and societal life is like. And I didn't want to highlight things that we were doing that I'm very proud of, but I didn't want it to be written like a report to be reviewed by other people to see if what we did, said, or experienced was legitimate. The Cap Times has also made a decision of reprinting. I don't know if this is going to be actually in print or just digital, but they're going to drop the original essay again. I don't know how often Cap Times drops an old essay, so I feel really cool about this because I didn't know that this was going to be a thing when I penned it. And so I made a decision to record an audio version of the article, to read it myself, because one, I wanted to experience it, and I wanted to see what it would be like for people to not only read it, but to hear me read it in my own voice. I tell you, it brought back some feelings. It took me back 10 years. And I felt some of those same emotions again. Again, I didn't know that this was going to be a thing, but it became a thing. And as you listen to the interviews in this season's podcast, and as you follow the links that we'll be dropping so that you can read follow-up articles, including mine, about where things are and what we've worked on and what we're glad about and what we still lament, I think it will give you a sense of just how long it takes to change racial missteps in our country, that we have to be committed to this, and that we can't just be short-sighted and live for short, easy to reach, low-lying fruit and outcomes. It's taken centuries to build this problem, and we're not going to fix it in 10 years. And as I learned the hard way, I'm not going to let the broader Madison community lay that burden on my shoulders or at my feet, because I didn't create systemic racism. Therefore, I'm not going to fix it. So let me just think for a moment before we move into listening to this. About 10 years ago, a number of things was happening in my life. I was about to turn 50. I turned 50 in November of 2013. So that was a new decade. That was a brand new thing. We had just added a major addition to our church. And it allowed us to build an auditorium so that we could be more community friendly and accessible. These are two major things in the life of any community leader, but a Black community leader, to build a $1 million expansion in the community where he grew up. Turning 50, being a thought leader was really, really major. I met with Paul Fanland at the time, who was the editor, to talk about my experiences in Madison. And he asked me to write this piece. I dragged my feet a bit because you'll hear in the article what I struggled with. But what I didn't say in the article, but I'll say here, is that a few other pieces came out around race during that same year, that same time. Madison was starting this somewhat on again, off again, slow to acknowledge issues of race beginning to raise its head. Madison wasn't sure that it really had a racial issue. It had troublemakers and whistleblowers who from time to time would talk about their experiences, but not really have a platform like the front page of the Cap Times to really express that. And I penned it. I wasn't interviewed. I penned it in my own words. And so as I watch other people write articles and pieces about race in Madison, I realized that they really weren't from Madison. They hadn't been raised in Madison. They weren't Cub Scouts or kids or paper boys. They were good, well-meaning people. But I knew that the Madison community would not listen as closely and deeply to outsiders as they would a native son. And so I felt this deep inner urging, a commissioning, if you will, to finish this article that I was procrastinating over, that I needed to write it before the end of the year. The deep sense that I had was that there was something I had to say, and it would be said in such a way that the community would hear it and be moved. Not necessarily take it all at once, but that I was supposed to pen an important perspective. And that nudging stirred me. And I remember having a meeting in New York, finishing the article on a flight, a Delta flight to LaGuardia, and getting off the plane and having to tell my friends who were picking me up that I needed a few minutes because I had to find Wi-Fi so that I could send the article off. And I remember hitting send and thinking, oh crap, what did I just do? I just told the family business. My white friends who thought I was safe are going to be mad. My black friends who thought I was down might feel betrayed. But I felt this commissioning that I had something that I needed to say, that I needed to say something people needed to hear, that people needed to hear something that they could believe. They needed to believe something that they could respond to. They needed to respond to something that was within their power to address, fix, change. And that if we really wanted to be this progressive, open-minded community, it had to be more than talk. It had to be walk. So I hit send. Whew. And life has never been the same since that moment. So it's a thing now. 10 years ago, I hit that button. Cap Times is dropping the piece again. They're asking other influencers in the community to respond to how things have changed. And they've given me space to write another 3,000 words. I don't take this lightly. I feel that is so important. But I'm glad that I had a chance to state things in 2013 that would pique the interest of some, prick the consciousness of others, notwithstanding, would still offer a perspective that would help people who read the article to frame their thinking when they would begin to hear about the deaths of unarmed black women and men. As years later, they would experience the impact of COVID and its disproportionate impact on black and brown people. As the truths of these things played out in living color on 24-hour news, on every major news outlet around the world, Madison and its readers would have to acknowledge the fact that they had been warned. And so I want to do something, nostalgia, that captures that moment, that kicked off a movement that forewarned my local community that a change was coming, and that we need to understand our broken systems in our community that are within our control in order to navigate in a world that is rapidly coming upon us. And so I want you to be still if you can. That might not mean physically for you, because you might be listening to this episode while you're driving or walking or exercising. But if you could just still your hearts, I don't want this to be entertainment. I want you to picture what you know about me, what you think you know about me, what you've gotten to know about me by listening to my podcast. I want you to listen to the words that were written a decade ago. And I need you to really note how poignant some of these words and points were, and how it sounds like some of them could have been written this morning. You know, when you're sipping a new wine or beer or cocktail or spirit, I should say, and those who are aficionados or new cigar will say, did you note hints of chocolate or vanilla bean or berries or hickory or smoke? And sometimes, like me, you're like, I didn't taste any of that. I just tasted beer. I just tasted wine. I just tasted a Macanudo cigar. But as you begin to slow down and do this, and someone coaches you through the process, I bet you can pick up on those hints. I want to coach you through this process. And I want you to take in this article like a fine wine, like a new cigar, like a new spirit. Because I don't need people to just listen to me. I need people to move with me. This is not my world of which I speak. It is ours. This is not my reality. It is ours. More importantly, and more sadly, it's the one that we're bequeathing to undeserving young children and young people who will repeat the sins and missteps of their mothers and fathers if their mothers and fathers don't awaken and direct them in new paths. This is not just the gift of a message from a black man to his black community. This is a gift of a prophetic voice and insight to anyone who gives a damn. This is our moment to be different, think differently, act differently. People may or may not have moved 10 years ago, but I bet you when they read this article, they will wish they had. And they will wish that America had also. So, this community has had justified anger, or JA as it's called, in my own words, since December 18th, 2013. But this, what you're about to hear, first here on the Black Like Me podcast, this is justified anger, not merely in my own words, but in my own voice. Still yourself as you look for hints and notes of truth, pain, hope, courage, fear, disappointment, strength, resilience, goodness, and blackness. This is JA in my own voice. Enjoy. I just finished my presentation about mass incarceration of African American men to a downtown Rotary luncheon when a woman from the audience approached me. "Wonderful presentation, Dr. G," she told me, adding that she was intrigued by my data and insights about Wisconsin's mass incarceration phenomenon. She added, "If you don't mind, I must tell you that I'm so glad that you're not some kind of angry black man." Well, this well-intentioned white Rotarian had just heard how Wisconsin has an epidemic that leads the nation in the incarceration of African American males between 20 and 24 years old. Now, giving these kinds of presentations typically take a toll on me because of the bleakness of the subject matter, the pain in my soul that's unearthed by the topic, and the typically blank stares of people who wonder, why are we still talking about racial disparities in 2013? "I am an angry black man," I responded. "Why would you think that I wasn't angry over what's happening in and to my community? Is it because I put on my best face and a safe black voice for you today?" After pouring out my heart to a room of strangers about my community's ugly realities, was this really the most sincere accolade that she had to offer? Yet she insisted, adding that I did not appear to be as angry as another local black leader that she named. "I am angry," I said, "just like that other leader." So why am I sharing this experience? My family has lived in Madison for nearly 45 years. Candidly, I enjoy what I consider to be a very fruitful and recognized work in our community. For nearly 30 years, I have led a vibrant, multicultural, and multi-class congregation that actively serves its community. For the past 21 years, I've led the Nehemiah Center for Urban Leadership Development, which offers a path to transformation for Madison's African American youth, families, and marginalized men. I was compelled to write this article for several reasons: to offer a fresh, indigenous African American male perspective on race relations in Madison, to voice my desire to see a stronger and healthier community, to challenge the city's subtle and at times not so subtle elitism, paternalism, racism, and classism. And most importantly, I'm writing this because I have a nephew, a godson, and a host of African American boys who I love and respect and cannot bear to have them exposed to the reality of the current inequities in our community. My concern about the quality of life for all Madisonians has grown in recent years. I personally need a better Madison for my daughter and the children in my community and congregation. I admit, I am frustrated that our city seems to be so enamored with its historic and national reputation as a liberal bastion that we either ignore our current social challenges, along with racial and economic disparities, or we blame our issues on individuals and families moving to Madison without fully accepting rightful culpability of certain homegrown problems. I'm not upset because Madison has issues. I am upset at how Madison skates on many of these issues. I hesitate a bit out of my concern my close white friends may misread my anger as being directed at all white people. My anger is with systems, ignorance, insensitivity, prejudiced views, and not with individuals. I'm equally concerned that I do not alienate my trusted African American friends by sounding as though I'm asking whites for social handouts without challenging African Americans to work harder and take responsibility for their own lives. I believe in personal responsibility that readies individuals to truly soar in life as walls of institutional racism are eliminated. Honestly, I feel that at this juncture in my life and career, I have the responsibility to voice my concerns that many Madison's disenfranchised African American residents experience regularly. It is their respect that I hope to earn by sharing my personal perceptions and experiences, many of which will surely corroborate their own. Why was it so important for this Rotarian, and perhaps to so many others, that I not be angry? Was anger the cause of the problems I discussed? Would anger keep me from working together with other community leaders towards community solutions? Does she feel that my education, my public profile, or the fact that I am an articulate speaker help me escape racial profiling, discrimination, or feeling as though I need to always represent my race in a positive way by working harder, faster, and longer? Little does she know that my anger is probably what keeps me connected to the dismal realities and staying the course as an activist. How can I not be angry when I've been a victim of racial profiling? A couple of years ago, I was pulled over and interrogated by police in my own church parking lot as I arrived for my standing Saturday evening meeting. How could I not be angry when the officer told me that he was looking for a red car that had been driving down the wrong side of the road? Now, my car is clearly black, evident even in the dimly lit church parking lot. I was questioned, albeit politely, about what I was doing there in a public space at 9 p.m. As questioning continued, my associate pastor, a white male, was already parked in the church lot and came to investigate. The officers never asked to see his identification, never asked his name, nor ascertained why he was parked in the parking lot waiting for me to arrive. They let him stand there making small talk with them while I convinced them to compare the name of the church sign with the name of my identification, as well as dropping names of several police officers who happened to attend my church. Again, they never asked my associate a single question. They apologized sincerely and with apparent embarrassment, and then left for another call. As they drove away, a flood of emotions which had been dammed up during the questioning began to flow. I could not afford to become emotional or outwardly upset during my interrogation, out of concern that my burning anger would betray me and cause me to look guilty for some real crime, warranting a search, a ride downtown, or further professional embarrassment. Like other African American male community leaders who have experienced similar situations, I did the typical thing that you do when something like this happens. You call the police chief, the mayor, you may even consider calling the media. You tell your wife, you compare notes with others who have had similar stories. You warn your sons and nephews about how to handle themselves in situations like these and to not lose their cool. You try to remind yourself that this isn't 1913 or 1963, but 2013. But this was not my first time being pulled over by the police near my church. I was once stopped on Park Street in the Park Bank parking lot in broad daylight. Another time I was questioned why I had visited with a person who was a parishioner only through the window of my car on Badger Road. I wasn't given any warning or citation because I had done anything wrong. I thought I looked pastoral in my black suit and was on my way to take a professional picture for my church. But one officer told me that my behavior fit the profile of a drug dealer. That's why I was stopped. What is drug dealer behavior? Wow. I am the 1994 City of Madison Martin Luther King Jr. humanitarian recipient. And in 1987, I was the youngest State Journal Know Your Madisonian ever. I'm a former South Madison paper boy, student, Cub Scout, and I was told to my face that I profile like a drug dealer. That nearly broke my family's heart. I felt horrendous chagrin that Saturday night because I knew profiling occurred. I just never thought of myself as profilable. I don't know what disgusted me the most, the experience with the police or my own delusion that education, hard work, and community service would shield me from being compared to a drug dealer. And there was another time, a Saturday night when I was at the church for a meeting, and as I entered the building, I discovered that there was an intruder. I left right away and called 911. I gave the dispatcher the details, and she instructed me to stay outside and not enter the building until the police arrived. I had a flashback of my last encounter with police in that same parking lot, and without thinking, I began to describe myself, my age, my ethnicity, color of clothing I was wearing, make and model of my car, etc., because I was concerned that when help arrived, I might be mistaken for the intruder. In this kind of moment, I sadly realized I have become conditioned to think like this. All accomplishments and accolades go out the window. It doesn't matter that I'm probably the city's most tenured minister, an author, radio host, and have spoken at the White House. It didn't matter that I was a proud product of Madison's public schools or that I hold degrees from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and Bakke Graduate University. None of that was able to shield me from the emotional blow that I don't feel completely safe or above suspicion in the parking lot of my own church. That sickening feeling is only exacerbated by the fact that if I talk about it, really talk about it, I'll sound angry and paranoid to many of my non-African American colleagues. But if I hold it in, I'll grow cynical and apathetic. Many African American leaders I know suffer from hypertension and bouts of depression due to the stress of living in our parallel society that boasts of an equality that can't quite be guaranteed. I'm sorry if this casts a negative light on Madison or on some of the women and men who protect this community. I'm merely stating that the fact that I feel the need to think ahead before calling 911 is problematic and unfair. These moments force me to consider my race and ethnicity during times when I am focusing on being a dad, a business person, or a pastor, not an African American male. I can remember recounting these experiences to a close white male friend who, with such a sincere, "I hate to be the one to tell you," responded, "Well, Alex, you do drive a very nice car." At which point, I discovered that I am not only angry, I'm hurt and disillusioned. Honestly, I wonder if my friend's response is much different than that of many of other whites in Madison. He wasn't trying to be insensitive or malicious. However, his comments were very wounding, although we are still good friends. His thinking, however, reflects a bit of the ideology that society functions solely on the basis of meritocracy. The best and the most qualified are typically hired, promoted, lauded, and compensated. In my friend's worldview, I must have done something to provoke police questioning because his Ivy League education, lakefront address, and white skin have always shielded him from such profiling. There was no room in his worldview for discrimination because he cannot fathom the most qualified individual being refused the job or raise or loan or mortgage simply based upon race. Therefore, racial disparities must be a figment of the imagination of inferiority complex individuals because the system corrects itself eventually as good trumps evil. If this view is true, there is never room to assess shortcomings or unjust systems. Hence, the person who has bumped against glass ceilings, redlining, and hiring discrimination must be defective because success and opportunity are colorblind. My experience is that many white Madisonians have an inordinate fear of being seen as racist. That fear is so paralyzing that it impedes honest dialogue about discrimination, systemic racism, and white privilege. The thought that a white individual could unwittingly participate in or benefit from systemic racism is horrid because these individuals fear benefiting from systemic racism. Typically, that conversation is quickly redirected toward the individual victim because personal responsibility is easier for many whites to discuss than systemic group culpability. A white colleague recently told me that many of their white peers feel that short of being murdered, nothing is worse than being called a racist. I responded by stating that if people exerted the same energy identifying, challenging, and dismantling unjust systems as they did fearing being called racist, we could change society. Madison cannot measure its own progress on race relations. We need to sit at a table with disenfranchised people to get a painful but accurate read on our city from their experiences. Wisconsin is making national headlines for its dismal African American community life. And although these statistics reflect a statewide snapshot, we can no longer believe that these numbers are mostly about Racine, Beloit, and Milwaukee. Sadly, Madison is contributing to the ugly statistics about mass incarceration, unemployment, high school dropouts, achievement gaps, and poverty. The recent Race to Equity report, which looked at the state of racial disparities in Dane County, offers a sobering, even frightening glimpse of African American life here. Wisconsin has the nation's worst rate of incarceration of young African American males on a per capita basis, and Dane County is much worse than the state average. Wisconsin has, by some measures, the wildest academic achievement gap between African Americans and white students in the country, and Dane County is worse than the state average. Why am I angry? I'm angry because it seemingly is the best of times for many and yet the worst of times for others. How long will we tell ourselves that this isn't so? Perhaps I missed it. However, when the Race to Equity report was published, I didn't see a single letter to the editor in local newspapers about the dismal snapshot of African Americans in Dane County. We are a state known for protests and rallies against injustice, yet we have been negligent in our response to our state's academic and incarceration disparity. There has been more online and editorial chatter on the hunting of wolves in newspapers than the slow, loathsome death of many African American families in our state. It nearly breaks my spirit that there's been no state of emergency announcement. I've seen no statement from the governor or Department of Public Instruction. There's been no press conference with city or county officials. It's almost as though we're holding our collective breath and waiting for this storm to pass. This storm isn't passing until a lot more damage has occurred and tens of millions of dollars have been blown. African Americans are not genetically inferior to our white counterparts, nor are we predisposed to failure and criminal activity. So what is wrong with our correction systems, government agencies, educational systems, foundations, and funding sources, businesses, churches, and political leaders that we have allowed this to happen on our liberal watch? Why are more African American leaders consulted and brought to real decision-making tables? Why am I often invited to the table to rubber stamp someone else's attempt at cultural competence and rarely ask how I might be supported to better serve the community? Why is there pushback when we as African American leaders suggest greater cultural competence, cross-cultural hires, and racial sensitivity to our community partners? It is becoming too costly, embarrassing, and destructive for our community to continue to ignore these huge problems. As a male African American Madisonian, I'm issuing a call that goes far beyond the various task forces that now exist. We need more. We need to bring national attention to the various crises of our community. I challenge the entire community to become concerned and involved. I challenge the African American pastors to make their voices and concerns known and hold community forums with politicians to demand action. I challenge white clergy to address racial disparity and discrimination from their pulpits. Challenge parishioners to think and act differently and to help sound the alarm of the injustice and inequity in our community. I need those pastors to explain how these systems are perpetuated by the silence of nice people. I invite Latino and Asian pastors to stand with us in solidarity. I issue a challenge to the business executives and directors of local funding agencies and foundations to sit with African American leaders to see how they may support us directly in our strategies in serving our community, rather than just harvesting our ideas and forgetting about us when solutions are funded. We are very capable of creating solutions for our own community if given the chance and resources. I challenge the broader community and governmental leaders to check the history books to see that there has never been a successful empowerment effort of African Americans that did not find its roots in the African American faith community and spirituality. Madison all but ignores the African American faith community as a credible community partner. This is an arrogant mistake, one that our major sister cities have refused to make. I want to remind the Urban League and NAACP to keep our political leaders' feet to the fire for finding doable solutions for eradicating this awful disparity, and to challenge them to seek community partnerships, indigenous leaders, and collaborative strategies to help them in doing so. I believe that it is grossly short-sighted to think that Madison leaders can empower the African American disenfranchised community, while many of the franchised African Americans feel divorced from the decision-making tables, funding pools, and power brokers. I publicly recommit myself to community-based solutions and strategic alliances with other partners. I cannot live with myself if I allow my middle-class life to convince me that I've arrived and others should do likewise. I am not successful because I am unique or because there were no systemic barriers. I succeeded because as a kid I was given wonderful tools from God, family, and a concerned and empowering Madison community to navigate through the rough waters of systemic racism. I challenge my Madison community to look more closely at the issues discussed here and work toward returning to its roots of offering disenfranchised families the same support and respect that Madison offered my single, divorced mother with 2 children in 1970 when she moved to Madison from Chicago to attend UW-Madison and to make a better life for her children. We can only address our issues to the extent we admit we have them. We should strive for more than just the reputation of liberalism. We should strive for the fruit of liberalism. Andy Crouch says in his book, Playing God, Redeeming the Gift of Power, that true power is creating space in which others may flourish, not falter. This is what I need those in power to create in Madison, a place where the poor and disenfranchised may flourish. I will close with the late Nelson Mandela. For to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. Forward.
Black like me. Black like me.
I want to thank you for taking time to listen to this episode of Black Like Me podcast with Dr. Alex G. You know, when I first imagined doing this podcast, I thought about myself with my iPhone sitting in a room in my house, just sort of doing this all on my own. But you know what? The reason why we've won awards and the reason why we have over 200 episodes up is because I have a brilliant team who helps me to make this podcast what it is. So let me take a moment and thank Jeremy and Eli, who are my editors and producers extraordinaire, Jakisha, who handles marketing. If you like that opening track of our theme song, you can show your appreciation to Corey Saffold, who created that and produced it, and Marcus Fleming, my cousin, who's on vocals. I also want to say that this podcast was started with the generous support of the Human Family Unity Foundation, and so we always want to stop and thank them for that. For the many patrons who support us through our Patreon page, thank you, thank you, thank you. You don't just listen, but you support, you lean in, and you help this podcast to be what it is. And then I need to thank you, the listeners, who make a point of downloading this, listening to it, and sharing it. Without all of you, this podcast would not be what it is and what it's becoming. Thank you so much.
Black like me.